Hello, welcome back to Friends with Cinefits. I am your host, Alex. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a while, but I am returning with some bi-weekly episodes where I have a guest join me to explore some pretentious movies where the Rotten Tomatoes critic score is higher than the audience score. I think these are the types of movies that I really enjoy talking about, so just thought these would get some interesting conversations. In this episode, I am joined by Troy from the Not a Bomb podcast to discuss Nobody's Fool from 1994. We discuss Paul Newman's career, the differences in viewing experiences based on our age gap, living in a small town, much like the one in this movie, and how to find the best, snobbiest restaurants. Before we dive in, if you haven't listened to Not a Bomb, it's a great podcast that explores films that either bombed at the box office or with the critics. If you want to get in touch with me or provide feedback, leave a rating, leave a review. The best way to get in touch with me is definitely the YouTube comments. This is going to be video. Or email me at friendswithcinefits@gmail.com. Unfortunately, in this episode, my mic had some problems. I'm rusty. Okay, it's fine. But I was able to edit around most of it. Just there are some points where it sounds like there's a little bit of interference or something. I'll try to fix that in future episodes. So shouldn't be too bad. I tried to fix it, but just wanted to say that I'm working on it. I'll fix it. So without further ado, here's our conversation on Nobody's Fool. Thank you for listening. So Nobody's Fool. I have the 4K right here, and I can hold it up. Nice on video. Directed by Robert Benton from 1994, starring Paul Newman. It has a 91% critic score and a 79% audience score. So still high with the audience, but the critics like it a little bit more. Why? I sent you a list of about 30 movies, probably.
It's a long list. Yeah.
You mentioned this one and another one, and we decided on this one because it fits the weather we're having right now. Why did you pick Nobody's Fool?
I guess a couple of reasons. So first of all, I love Paul Newman, and I think this is a film. You look at that guy's filmography; it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And even on our show, we had recently, because he had a birthday here maybe a day or two ago, and we had asked like, "Hey, what's everybody's favorite Paul Newman film?" And what was amazing is the amount of people who pick something different. So me personally, my favorite probably of all time is The Hustler. I absolutely adore that film. I think you just watched it.
I watched it last night.
I got to know, just sidetrack, what'd you think of it?
It was great. The opening scene with him in Minnesota Fats, I was so into it that by the time it was over, I was like, what else is there to cover on the movie? Like, what else is happening? And then there's an hour 45 still left.
It's crazy. It's
great.
Crazy storytelling. It's an amazing character. I adore that film. And it was sort of what's funny is I really didn't pay attention to Paul Newman until Nobody's Fool. And then it was like, oh, and my dad had always repped about The Hustler, and I'd seen it before Nobody's Fool and liked it. But then this was the film that was like, I really have to do the deep dive. So I've always been a big fan of his. And to me, this was in 94, the film, because I'm just coming out of college, and I'm like, wow, I really like this actor, and I like the stuff that he's doing. And he has a really interesting filmography. So that was the first reason. The second reason is I saw this in my 20s, and it's not a film that I think a 20-year-old would go out and watch. And I absolutely loved it when I saw it. And 1994 is a strange year. Not strange. It's an amazing year in terms of movies. But what I found pretty fascinating was every decade that I would go back and revisit it, the movie felt a little bit different. And I thought it would be a really interesting conversation to get your take on it, because obviously there's a few generations between us.
Yeah.
And I remember what I liked about it when I first saw it. But I'll say this, I enjoyed the film in my 20s, but I understand the film more in my 50s.
Yeah.
And I thought that would make a much more interesting conversation for your show.
Yeah, I agree. I do think we probably view it in a different light. I think you, when we were talking about covering this, you kind of hinted at discussing that. And then the next day I watched The Bridge on the River Kwai.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I feel like it's kind of the same thing where I've never been in the army. I've never been a POW, but I'm a very empathetic person.
Yeah.
And I can empathize with the story. I haven't been in situations exactly like it, but I felt trapped or desperate or wanted to do a good job on something. And so like I can empathize with it. And I feel like with Nobody's Fool, there's this story about responsibilities and relationships and that aspect of it that I can really connect to, but there is probably the ticking clock that goes with those things that I don't quite feel yet whenever I watch it.
Yeah, it's a film. I know the premise of your show is to kind of discuss what is the disconnect between the critics and the audience. Mm-hmm. And I find this film really fascinating in that regard, because when you look at this movie, and my reaction to it is always I'm just drawn in by all of the characters, and I always find something a little bit different to appreciate about each character with each viewing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a beautifully shot film too, but it's really a small town film that can feel a bit like an elderly version of Seinfeld. Yeah. So it's Seinfeld, the whole premise of that was, well, it's the TV show about nothing. Nothing happens, right? And they built this whole concept around just these little moments that would happen in these people's lives, mm-hmm. and then play it up for comedy. And I always think of a film. This sounds, you can tell me I'm totally crazy on this.
No.
So when I recommend Nobody's Fool, I feel like it's the antithesis of a movie like Steel Magnolias. Now, I love Steel Magnolias.
I haven't seen Steel Magnolias.
Yeah, and it is drama personified, but I love that thing. I love Sally Field. I love Dolly Parton. I love Julie Roberts. I will openly admit in public that I bawled during Steel Magnolias. But it is a film that has big dramatic beats, and you see these characters change as a result of these huge events. Mm-hmm. And to me, Nobody's Fool tries to tackle some of the similar topics to some degree, but does it in a very quiet, nuanced way. And I really like that. So mm-hmm. Again, the film is a character study, and the dramatic events or the things that happen that shift some of the plot, mm-hmm. it's all very subtle. So it feels like a really good quality, American film.
Yeah.
That just talks. It's so layered. There's so many things we could talk about in terms of scenes and characters, mm-hmm. and what's going on with these people. And I got to say, even some of the actors and actresses in this thing, if you talk about Melanie Griffith or you talk about Bruce Willis, I don't think you're ready for their performance in this film. Mm-hmm. It's very different from the other movies that they make.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to touch on the I guess the character arc that we go through. It's not the traditional arc that you see in that I feel like audiences might be expecting in a movie.
Yeah.
But it's like, Sully isn't going to change. He's always going to be Sully, but as the movie goes on and he has all these different connections, he's just more likely to let someone else in and to start those connections. So an example is like with his son, like he can't go back and change the negative impact that he had on his son's life. But he can take the time that he has left to connect with his grandson and like give him a connection there. I feel like there's so many examples with all of the different like characters in this that you were talking about. Like Bruce Willis, I wasn't expecting him to be in this, and whenever I saw that he was in this, I wasn't expecting, like, he kind of sucks, but then I also I empathize with him, and I feel like all their relationship dynamic is something that I want to talk about, because there's like this mentor-mentee relationship, but they're also each other's biggest critics. They're like arch rivals. They're best friends. They
It's
they
messy. It's
they're in
so
love with the
messy.
same lady, kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah, it is, and it feels human, I guess. Like relationships aren't black and white. It can be messy like this.
You know how you just said that relationships aren't black and white? I think that's one of the pivotal themes in this film is you think about all of these characters coming together. And I think Robert Benton, who wrote and directed, if you look at his filmography, I mean, he will tackle this topic with stuff like Kramer versus Kramer and stuff like that. But I really think this is one of his best works, which is saying something if you go back and look at all the movies that he worked on. But you're absolutely right. Sully is sort of the key pivotal character here, and his relationship with everybody in this town is just messy. It is. I love the fact that Sully is trying to repair his relationship with his son. It's never going to be 100% fixed, but he's on the path, like you said, through his interaction with his grandson, and he's not trying. How do I say this? He's not trying to repair things with his son in some overt fashion by going to like therapy or having this big monologue or speech. He's really trying to position or try to be a better person through that interaction with his grandson. But I love the fact that he tries to be there for Miss Barrel, which is his landlady, who also happens to be like his old teacher, played by, an amazing Jessica Tandy. I think it was her last role, actually. And what I like about that relationship is he doesn't think he's good enough to be her support, but he ends up being there in these very crucial moments. And then you've got
And her own son isn't there for her. He backs out and leaves.
Yeah, again, it's messy. And Sully tries to be a best friend to Rub and isn't always successful in that particular instance.
I could not remember his name. I was like, is it Dirt? Is it Mud?
It's
Rub.
It's Rub.
Okay.
And Toby. So Melanie Griffith, his character, he tries to give her confidence as a woman, knowing what her husband's doing. But I love the fact that he doesn't want to betray Carl, which is played by Bruce Willis. So that whole chemistry and dynamic is so complex and it's so fascinating to watch. And just when you think it's going to go in a different direction, I think the screenplay pivots and gives you a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
And I think this movie, I don't know how many times I've seen it. It's a joy for me to watch. I really do love this thing.
Good. Yeah. The word complex kept coming to my mind too. Like, you don't just have the one complex main character, but every single person he interacts with, even the one-legged lawyer, Philip Seymour Hoffman's in this, and
Young Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah. It feels so lived in. Like, these are all relationships that you're just thrown into, and it feels like it's a world that already exists, and all these people have all these different backstories together. They have a history. They've all been friends or drinking at the same bar, playing cards all the time. And I love that this movie doesn't explain that. You're not like, oh, how did he meet his lawyer? Oh, how did him and Toby become friends? And why specifically doesn't he work for Bruce Willis's character?
Yeah,
anymore.
I'm wondering. So I was thinking about this and watching it because you and I were neighbors for like a few years.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched you grown up in small town, rural Indiana too.
You watched my hair come and go.
I did. And I've known you for a long time. So what I find interesting is that whole comment about it feels so lived in. I know that this is a fictional town and it takes place sort of in the Northeast. And you're absolutely right. The snow there feels so realistic. I think it helped when I was watching this. It was snowing like crazy in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Where, you were getting the same thing.
Yep.
But I was going to ask you this question, like, does it resonate a little bit more knowing that you grew up in sort of a rural Indiana environment. And some of these characters, and trust me, Alex, we've come across some of these characters
Yeah.
in our mutual lifetimes, and may have lived next to some of them. But I'm wondering if that experience of coming up within like a small town really helps you connect to a film like this.
Honestly, I don't know. Like, I feel like in some way it has to, even if it's just subliminally. Like, I feel like that's why I was so lucky with my upbringing. Like, those are my formative years living in that neighborhood near you guys. And I feel like maybe a movie like this, I can't quite connect to with that background because it wasn't like relationships weren't my worry. Like I didn't really understand other people as much, and I was just like, okay, I want to wrestle with my monkey on the trampoline. I want to play with my wrestlers. And then I got older and it was like, okay, I want a car. I want to go take a girl out on a date. I want to, and it was never quite like the community that you see in this movie. I think another big thing in this movie is responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I had no responsibilities.
That's not true. That is not true. We
I
paid you to babysit a few nights. So you had some big responsibilities with my kids.
It was mostly Erica doing all the work, and then she was also babysitting me.
Yeah, and I don't expect you to relate on the level of what is going on with like a Sully or any of the characters. Mm-hmm. But I do think so. I've grown up in Wichita, Kansas, and believe it or not, that's a city. And then I've spent like a ton of time, 10 years in outside of in Evansville. So I feel like I've spent all of this time in different pockets. And what I find interesting is when you see a film like this that is supposed to take place in like a rural community. Mm-hmm. And to your point, the movie opens up with him going to court and you see him with his one-legged attorney. And the next thing you know, they're playing cards in the back of the bar with the people that they're just trying to sue. Right. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what is going on here? And I always have this question, like, would people actually believe that type of relationship would occur if they hadn't kind of grown up in it or been around in it? Mm-hmm. And I think about like me growing up in Wichita, Kansas. My parents were in Waukene, Kansas. So if you talk about the flatness of Kansas, Waukene is like out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But growing up summers there, I would see a film like this and I go, that's totally relatable. But I'm wondering if I don't want to say the urban person, moviegoer, when they look at this film and they see that type of relationships, is that a stretch for them?
Yeah, that's a good point. I will say, since I have grown up and have moved away and I have lived in bigger cities, I do like miss that. But I've always took it as the time period. Like, oh, it was just like the late 2000s, the early 2010s, like that time period. Like, yeah, we used to just like run around the neighborhood all day and all night and like hang out with everyone, and everyone was so close. And there are people that it's like, this guy's weird, but like he lives in the neighborhood, so we're gonna hang out with him. And then now, like, I don't have any of the, like, I don't know anyone. I know my next door neighbor, but other than that, like, I don't know anyone on my street. I did just move here 7 months ago, so
I said, you got to give it some time.
Yeah.
And plus, I think COVID messed everything up in terms of like social communities. But I don't know. I think that's why I appreciate this movie a little bit, because there is an authenticity to it. Mm-hmm. So Preston's screenplay and his direction, and really all down to the performance, or not Preston, Benton. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I said Preston. But
I don't either.
Yeah, I have no clue. But Benton's direction and his screenplay and everything else, there's this level of this authenticity that for me, it just, I fall into it with no questions. Mm-hmm. But I'm always wondering, like, if somebody hasn't been exposed to that in their real life, would they question that, or would they have a problem with some of these relationships? Like, well, that's just too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. Like, I think if I showed this to Alexis, she wouldn't understand it. I know I asked her, like, hey, do you want to watch this with me? I think you'd like it. She's very seasonal in her watches. So it was snowing outside, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I got this snowy movie. Like, you're going to love it. And I like read the description for her. She was like, no, it's fine. And then I like pulled up a trailer and was like, let's watch the trailer. And like, no, no, I don't, doesn't seem like something I would like. And she grew up in Columbus, Ohio, big city. Like, she has never had that small town feel. So I think
Well,
you
how do you
definitely have a
pitch a
good
movie
point.
like this to her outside of just
How do you pitch it to anyone? Like, that was going to be my next question to you. Like, you've seen it so many times and
yeah.
you get enjoyment out of it, but how like I came over a few months ago and we watched a bunch of movies.
Mhm.
Like, what prevents you from pulling Nobody's Fool off the shelf and being like, we got to watch this? It's not really like a a group watch, I wouldn't say, but it is like fun and funny in ways, but I don't know.
So I'm trying to think in 94, and I know we've talked about this, but one of my favorite jobs, obviously in high school, is working in the movie theaters. And then from high school into college, anytime I went back home, I would still try and pull some shifts or hours. And when you're getting out of school and you're like, oh, well, maybe I could work. At this point, I'm like, no, I'm done with the movie theater stuff, but I still love going to the movies. And I remember, oh, this looks good. I like the trailer, and I'm a big Bruce Willis fan. So let's be honest here. The reason why I initially went to see this thing was Bruce Willis, not Paul Newman.
Okay.
So, and that's why I say, like, I saw The Hustler in some of his films, Butch Cassidy beforehand, but going into this thing going, hey, Bruce Willis is in this film, but he's not like top billed or anything, but I still want to see it. And then walking away going, I really need to go back and watch a lot more Paul Newman. I really appreciated everything from a technical and performance level, and maybe from a, I don't know, prestigious, pompous film nerd perspective.
Yeah, that's what we do here.
Yeah, you're looking at it and you're going, well, the critics love this thing, and it is a really deep character study. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I can't necessarily relate to a guy who makes all of these mistakes in life, and most of the movie is just him trying, I don't want to say repair it, but he's just trying to set himself on the right path and do good. It's not so much about the end result, but can he get on the journey to make something of himself at this stage in his life, right? But for me, I'm bragging about Paul Newman's performance. Bruce Willis is fantastic. You haven't seen him like this. Melanie great. So you're talking about maybe the technical merits of it, etc. But when you're trying to pitch it, I think, when I originally saw it, it's like, well, he was nominated for an Academy Award for this, and you're going to love Paul Newman and to watch his nuanced performance, but you're not pitching it for the comedy. You're not pitching it for the drama. If you're pitching it, you're like, hey, this is a really interesting slice of life Americana film that is, you're going to spend, your runtime following a very flawed character, and that's interesting. But the reason why I wouldn't pull this out when you come over is it's almost like you ever have like that this is a terrible analogy, but when people come over and you're like, oh, would you like a beer, or would you like some Jameson, etc. Yeah, I'll give that to you. But when it's like, oh, well, I've got this 15-year Irish redbreast, and I'm going to drink that by myself because I really don't want to talk to anybody while I drink that. Nobody's Fool is like that for me. Like, I really enjoy watching this on my own and just analyzing it and studying it and trying to get a little bit more out of it and peel the onion back and see what the next layer is.
Yeah.
So I don't mind recommending it to somebody like you, who I know that this would fit within your taste, but it's not something I would run out there and go, oh, everybody's got to see Nobody's Fool.
Yeah.
Because when you said, oh, well, the audience score is this, but the critic score is this, I'm like, oh, I totally get it 100%.
Yeah, I'm surprised the audience score is 79%, and I don't know if that surprises me that it's that high. I guess I should give more people the benefit of the doubt, but that's like 8 and 10 people like this movie. Like, I feel like if I asked 10 people in my life, I don't know if I'd get that many, but you were talking about peeling back the layers of an onion upon multiple watches. So I wanted to go into my watch history of this because you've watched it a bunch of times. I tried watching it about 6 months ago for the first time.
Oh, really? I thought this was
And
your first watch.
no, it's not.
Oh.
It started, and you get the snowy landscape. You have the Howard Shore score,
Hmm.
and I'm like, I can't watch this unless there's a foot of snow outside.
Okay.
So I immediately turned it off and I watched something else that didn't require snow. And then in, I think, October of last year, we got a big snow, and I was like, I'm watching it, baby. And so I put it in, and I did have a really good time with it, but I don't know if it went any further than that. Like I was like, yeah, this is fun. It was like, I think it's interesting. The performances are great. I really like all the people in the cast. They're like fun, they're quirky. And then it was when I added it to my list for things to talk about because I was just going through just doing research on like movies that have big discrepancies in critic and audience score, and this one came up and I was like, yeah, that would be a fun one to talk about. And when you picked it, I was like a little bummed because I was like, I just watched it like 3 months ago. Do I want to watch it again?
You
And
know
I was
what's
like,
funny? I had just watched it about 2 months ago.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'll do it. I think we would have a good conversation about it. And so I watched it again, and it like stunned me how I was just immediately back into it and like wasn't checking my phone. I was like just into it, not like it was the first time, but like I was just seeing it through a different lens because I'd seen it before. Now like I knew what to expect. I think on the first watch I was like, I that was different. That was different than anything I've ever seen. But now that I know what to expect, I could actually pay attention to all of the little characters and all of the relationship dynamics and really analyze it. So this is my second watch, third time starting it, second time finishing it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's definitely going to be one like I don't know if every single year, whenever we get a snow, I'm throwing it on, but it's definitely going to be something I watch very often, if not for one specific very short shot of Melanie Griffith alone that is burned into my memory.
It's a stunner.
Yeah.
It comes well, I it's such a playful moment between those two characters too.
And he just stands there.
Well, so this is, I don't know, this is the brilliance of Paul Newman. I think this time around, I've always found that sequence kind of funny, his reaction to it, and also we can talk about the police officer and what happens
Yeah.
there, and also them going in front of the judge, which I think is the funniest part of the entire scene. But I think Paul Newman's best scene is when Bruce Willis takes him over to the house, and he's
Yeah.
talking about the floor. So I think what I love about this film, and this is the thing that hit me on this watch, was some people would look at this character and go, you're following a character who might not be a good person in the traditional sense, and he's a flawed protagonist all the way up to the end of the film. So he still is Sully by the end of the film, but he has these very small changes. And when you go, well, why is he the way he is? It really comes back to these moments of him visiting that house. And then also he has this sequence where he talks about his father and how he treated his mother, and then him getting in the middle of it and what happened to that, all. So the reasoning of why he is the way he is all right there, but it's not in your face. It's not some huge exposition. There's not some big dramatic moment where he's going to burst out and go, well, the reason why I have trust issues, the reason why I'm not great at relationships is because all of my role models were even way more flawed than he is.
Yeah.
And I like how this film tries to tackle this very, I think, sensitive topic of what happens to the victims who come out of these really abusive families, and then how are they going to treat the people in their lives? Like, that's what part of the film is about to a certain degree. And I find Newman's performance one of his best. Like, if you're talking, hey, what are your favorite Paul Newman films of all time? Like, this is going to be in the top 3 for me, because watching him through this film, it very much reminds me of his performance in The Hustler, because you watch all of that confidence in The Hustler just go away. And then you get that final sequence of him beating Minnesota Fats, and what he's realizing, the cost to get there and how much that pains him.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like Newman is tapping into that piece of The Hustler for this film. And it's almost like, well, what would happen if Fast Eddie went to a small town and then had to deal with all of that backstory, and how would his relationships work with all of the people around him? And I think Nobody's Fool kind of fits a nice, perfect story arc if you were to try and put those two characters together.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm very glad I watched The Hustler now that you made the connection. I think the scene you're talking about with him in the house, where he's like, he purposely destroyed the house,
Yes.
just in spite of his father and how his father was. And it ruined the beautiful house. Bruce Willis is being like, dude, like, this house was perfect and you ruined it. Like, you ruined everything. And he doesn't have to say anything. He just sits there and deals with it. It's rough. It's a rough
It is.
watch.
And Bruce Willis is like, hey, I'll give you money for that. He's like, take it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, gut the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there's all of these, and you want to talk about another interesting layer, is what happens to Sully as a character, and then you're watching him kind of deal with that pain, and then what really Jessica Tandy does for him at the end of the film just sets him off a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's almost his way of just saying, okay, I can kind of let go. He's not totally letting go, but he's like, yeah, I'll forgive you this time. But what I find interesting is what's happening in the background is he ruined this dog with those pills.
Yep.
And now he's stuck with this broke dog. And he's okay with that. And what I find interesting is you've got this screenplay that is really having you focus on Sully, but in the background, Benton is writing this whole subplot about Carl's dog, and how, it's not a guard dog anymore because it went through this trauma, and now Sully has to take care of it. And it's like, well, Sully, in some very subtle way, it's almost like, well, are we watching like the birth and now, the resolution of Sully through what happens with this dog?
That's crazy. I did not pick up on that whenever I watched it, but yeah, it's definitely there. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean that's why Ben's screenplay is so good. I mean, I think he's got a really strong filmography. You should go through it. Billy Bathgate is another one that I think is very underrated. It's a Bruce Willis film that he did. But this might be my favorite because there's so much going on. So when you watch this, you can watch these little parallels in the background and say, okay, Sully is at this point in his journey through this film, where he's at this point in his life, and there's some kind of similarity happening within the film with the dog as an example. But yeah, I find Sully as one of the most interesting characters that Newman has put in his filmography. I totally understand why he got nominated for an Academy Award. I can't remember who won that year. It might have been, was it Tom Hanks for Forrest Gump or something?
I think so.
Yeah. Which in my head, it's like, okay, that was a pretty important cultural moment, that film. But I can tell you this, I've seen this film way more times than I've seen Forrest Gump.
Yeah, 100%. I think this one's more rewatchable too because of the performance.
Yeah, I think so too.
I've seen Forrest Gump twice, I think, and don't really have a desire. Maybe eventually I'll go back to it, but not anything like this where I'll watch it often. You mentioned other scenes that you liked. So the one was Philip Seymour Hoffman, I take it.
Yes.
Their fight scene. That's really good because he is just like egging Philip Seymour Hoffman on the entire movie. Kind of like he does with Carl too, with stealing the snowblower all the time. But like he's egging him on and it's playful. And then he sees him driving on the sidewalk when oh my gosh, not Mud.
It's
Tug?
Rub.
Rub.
Yeah.
I gotta write it down. Rub is like storming away, right? And
Yeah, they're following him because he's upset that his son is now working for him.
yeah, like
Yeah.
replacing him in Sully's life. Um, I really loved the scene, and I loved the aftermath of it, of him like accepting the responsibility and turning himself in and
Yeah.
going to jail. Yeah, did you have anything to add on that scene or the scene after that in the courtroom? Or I think it's the courtroom.
The courtroom scene is fantastic because you have the judge basically he's reprimanding Sully, but at the same time he's reprimanding Philip Seymour Hoffman by like what did the situation constitute you taking your gun out and discharging it in the small town where nothing really happens, right? And I just there's so much comedic timing going on between the judge kind of commenting on the scenario and everybody's reaction to it. But I don't know. It's funny you said that, where he discharges a gun, you expect somebody to die. There's a sequence with Jessica Tandy where she has a scare and she has to go to the hospital. And what I love about this film is, again, I would go back to Steel Magnolias. So the Julia Roberts death scene crushes me, right? And that movie has these very melodramatic moments that are iconic, and I love them. And what I like about this film is it starts to feel like it's going to go down the path. Like, here you go. Jessica Tandy's death is going to, set into motion this huge change in Sully. Or here's the third act dramatic moment, and all of a sudden he's just a new person. It doesn't happen. Nobody dies. Nobody gets shot. There's some, I'm not going to say there's like slapstick comedic moments in this film, but there are very funny moments in this film. But I like that we've basically got a screenplay that says, yeah, we should really play out the drama here, and we're going to go a different direction with it. And I like that. And it gives Sully a chance to say, and it's very realistic, hey, I'm going to course correct, but it's not going to be a major shift. And most people won't notice it, to be quite honest. I love that about the film because as you get older, here's my old man talk.
Okay.
As you get older, you're going to see all of these changes from everybody you know. And at the same time, you won't see them. What'll happen is all of that change happens subtly. And then one morning you're going to wake up and go, oh, that person's kind of new to me in this regard. Or they're making a choice that I've seen that option present 1,000 times to that person, but they chose something different. And then you're going to go, well, why did they act different? Or why did they do this different? And you're going to go, oh, they must have learned something along that journey to say, hey, I got to go down this path. And that's what this film kind of represents.
Yeah. And I think that could be why just your average moviegoer might have trouble seeing that and understanding it. They're like, well, nothing happened. Nothing really changed in the end. He's still a grumpy old man, but it is the nuance. And like you said, you see these subtle changes. And I feel like this movie's the same on rewatches for you too, where like you just go through and you're the one changing though. You're not seeing the movie changing. You are the one changing. So you see it differently every time.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about like how I would view movies, even today or younger. And you've only got like 2 hours or 90 minutes, or I guess in today's film world, it's 3 or 4 hours. But you've got that short amount of time to kind of say your protagonist starts here. And if you're talking about a hero's journey, you have to represent this big change. And there has to be a lot of suspension of disbelief at my age when you see a character walk in with this personality, and by the end of the film, they're totally different. Because one of the things I've learned over life is like there's only 3 things that can change your personality. And I think you and I have talked about this. Do you remember this?
I do not.
Okay. There's only 3 ways to change your personality in real life. Do you know what they are?
I'm sure someone dying is one.
Well, brain surgery,
Okay.
religious conversion,
Okay.
or deep psychoanalysis. That's the only way you're going to change somebody's personality. So if you run across somebody and you go,
Gotcha.
man, I don't like that person, I think their personality stinks, it's not changing until one of those 3 events happen. But in film land, we kind of suspend disbelief and go, well, this person's actions or personality are one way, but this event is supposed to happen, and it changes the person in such a way that they're a new person by the end of the film, right? And that's kind of the hero's journey in the action film, etc. But in real life, it doesn't work that way. So unless there's brain surgery, deep psychoanalysis, or religious conversion, you're stuck with that personality. What I love about Nobody's Fool is it understands that concept. That's why I say I understand it more in my 50s. Sully's personality didn't change, but some of his habits are changing because of some of the lessons he's picking up or some of the choices that he's making to kind of better his position at that stage in his life. But at the end of the day, his personality didn't change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very insightful. I think this is the type of movie that it kind of sneaks up on you. Like
it does.
You're not expecting to come away with anything like that. And even this conversation, like I've watched the movie twice in 3 months, and then now we're just sitting here talking about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it even more because I hear your perspective on it. I think there's so much care put into every single scene and every single character in this. Like you can tell they really thought out, like we're not going to make this like your action movie, like you said. Like this has to feel real. This has to feel believable. You have to feel like you could sit at the bar and be like watching people do this.
I agree. And what I also find fascinating about Paul Newman is the same year he does this film, he does Hudsucker Proxy, the Coen Brothers film. And the character he's playing in that one is very much a corporate cutthroat, right? And so when you watch Nobody's Fool, his acting and his performance and the way he wears that emotion and some of those looks, it really looks so effortless. And you go, well, he's basically just playing Paul Newman, right? But then you go watch Hudsucker Proxy and you go, well, that's not the guy I saw in Nobody's Fool. There's an underlying charm that's in both roles. Then if you go back and watch The Hustler or any of his films, he did a film around this time period, Twilight in '98, which is pretty close to this one, which again is directed by Benton. And it's a nice little film noir. And you look at that character and it's entirely different than this one and Hudsucker Proxy. But what I really love about his performance in here is somebody who hasn't seen a Paul Newman film would look at his performance and go, I don't really think he's acting. I think this is just an older actor who's wearing all of his emotions out there and is maybe looking at some of his life choices and saying, well, I could have done better in these scenarios. But at the end of the day, that's how good his performance is. Because if you were to look at any of his work around this time period, it's entirely different.
Yeah. Yeah. And he followed this up a couple of years after this. He was Doc Martin in Cars.
Yeah.
He looks like a car in that movie.
he's transformative as an actor.
Yeah. I did want to ask, like, or I guess point out, it is such a shame that we get Paul Newman at his old age in this movie and giving a performance, and we don't have the opportunity with someone like Bruce Willis or Philip Seymour Hoffman to put out a performance like this at old ages. Philip Seymour Hoffman obviously has passed, and Bruce Willis, I've heard, it has had some health issues, and
he has a form of dementia. I can't remember what the technical term is right now, but he basically has, for the most part, lost his ability to speak.
Yeah. And it's a shame that we don't get, like, you know, more films like this from really talented actors at this stage in their life doing stuff. I mean, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. We are going to get Harrison Ford in Captain America.
Yeah, but Harrison Ford needs to be making these films. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
He's an amazing actor. And I love the fact that people are trying. I mean, he did the Indiana Jones film, which I have mixed feelings about.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he's an icon. But what I've always respected about, you know, I guess Paul Newman, I don't want to say this because Harrison Ford has some really good performances out there. But at the end of the day, you could make the argument like Harrison Ford's a movie star and Paul Newman's an actor. And that would be a hard one to debate. But honestly, if you go back in some of Harrison Ford's, filmography, you can make the case he's got some really good performances in there.
Yeah.
I would say this sucks, but at some point, people are going to come back around on Bruce Willis and go back through his filmography and go, we didn't appreciate him enough, even in his prime, because, he worked for scale on this film, and you don't even see his name in the title cards. It comes up at the end. And that's how much he wanted to be a part of this. But if you go back through his filmography and look at some of these independent or smaller films that he did outside of the, many diehards, et cetera, you're going to find a really well-rounded, versed actor that, again, at some point, somebody's going to come along and go, this guy was one of the best in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, this was the same year as Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after his Die Hard days, but or I guess the first two, I think, but yeah, I haven't seen a lot of Bruce Willis outside of Die Hard, and
go back and watch stuff like Mortal Thoughts, or even the comedy stuff like Death Becomes Her. He has a really versatile filmography, and again, he's always going to be known for John McClane, I think. And it's one of my top 10 films of all time, 100%.
Yeah.
But the reason why Die Hard is so iconic and classic is because of what he does with that character. And they found somebody in Alan Rickman to match him in terms of an antagonist.
yeah.
I mean, Die Hard has some great action, but let's make, let's be honest here. It really comes down to Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman's cat and mouse antics in that film that make it so memorable. And you go back and look at some of these other Bruce Willis roles. Did he phone it in Striking Distance, I think, is the one, I don't know. He made some 90s just action films, right? And everybody did. Even Newman has some misses in his filmography.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you go back and look at it holistically and go, well, what was he trying to do from a comedic standpoint, dramatic standpoint, action, all of that stuff, you're going to go, wow, he was pretty versatile.
What's your opinion on Philip Seymour Hoffman?
I love him.
Yeah.
Yeah, gone way too soon. So
Yeah, he's definitely not the movie star. He's an actor.
he's 100% the actor, and I like that you can go back and look at this performance and go, the guy was funny.
Yeah, he's doing something different than the movies I know him for. Like, even on the back of the 4K, it says he's known for The Master. I'm like, yeah, this is a lot. If you're expecting The Master, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and you get this, you're going to be in for something completely different.
What's your history with Melanie Griffith?
Is it Body Double?
Yeah.
Brian De Palma? I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, she's another one that, in terms of 80s, 90s Hollywood actress, she had some fame and notoriety, but I think she's perfect in this film. She's so good as this heartbroken woman who's married to Bruce Willis, who is just sleeping around with everybody in the town, and everybody knows it. And she's left with dealing with that, but at the same time confiding in Sully and losing all of her confidence, but he's trying to build her up.
Yeah.
And she's truly in love with Sully, but not in this love that is like sexual or anything of that nature. Just understanding like truly what he can be, but knowing what he is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I had somewhere in my notes. That's one of the things about doing this podcast is I can take notes while I watch a movie now.
Yeah.
But I completely haven't done that in years, so my notes are all scattered everywhere. But I do think it's interesting that instead of trying to get her to love him that way, kind of, it turns to where he is like telling Carl, like, dude, you are fucking up worse than I've ever fucked up. Like, she loves you. What are you doing? And I do think it's complex because they very slightly mention that, like, he just had an open heart surgery or like a heart valve replacement, and so now he has this new lease on life. And so, like, they understand it. They're like, yeah, we get it. You just died, and you feel like you don't want to go back to living the life you were living when you almost died, but like you have to realize what you had at the moment. Like you were living. This isn't living.
100%. I think so. If you were to look just at the Sully character and Carl character, again, why I think this movie is so deep is it absolutely hammers home this theme that the life you have right now is composed of the choices you've made in the past, and nobody else. The choice you made. So you're 100%. You've got this subplot with Carl just having this open heart surgery, and now he's like, new lease on life. I'm gonna go and do everything I ever wanted to because life is short and all this other stuff. Not understanding what those choices are doing to his marriage and his reputation and everything else. And watching even Bruce Willis at the end of the film at the poker table come to the realization that, oh my gosh, all of the choices I've made, I'm now losing my wife right now. Like she's out the door. And again, Bruce Willis is so good in this because you're just watching that whole, I don't know, recognition and acknowledgement that he messed up and that he can't fix this. But what the film is trying to show is, and Sully's a great example of this, like where you're at is because of the choices you made. And so what's great about life is you can continue making choices. You just got to make the next right choice to get on the right path. It's not going to, it's a journey, man. It's not going to turn overnight. Yeah. And so even as the movie ends, he doesn't have an amazing relationship with his son, but he's starting to counteract all those bad choices with a few right ones. And I find this movie really uplifting. Like if you don't walk away from this film feeling good about life or just feeling good about the possibility that no matter how messed up you may have made your life, you can turn it around because it's all about the choice.
Yeah. Yeah, the movie almost ends on his grandson like giving the one-legged man his leg, and he's so scared.
Yeah.
And I just like almost cry every time because like I remember being a kid and being scared. And yeah, it's just a prosthetic leg. It's not going to hurt you, but when you're a kid, you think it's going to come alive and eat you or something.
Oh yeah.
And like he does that like long walk in the bar to go do it. And yeah, it's like you said, it's so uplifting. It's so interesting because it's a sad movie, kind of like the old lady with dementia, I guess, that like keeps wandering the streets in the cold, and like it's heartbreaking. And then there are the moments where he's like, "Hey, where are you going?" She's like, "I'm gonna go visit my sister in Albany." And he's like, "Well, let me take you there. It's faster if I drive." And she's like, "Cool." Like, it's funny, it's sweet, but it's heartbreaking. But that is him doing something nice. Another thing.
Can we that comment I find super. This is why I wanted to talk about that film, because I do think somebody could look at that and go, there is a sweet sentimentality to the film, but at the end of the day, it is a bit heartbreaking in terms of growing old and what that's like. And maybe I would have felt that years ago, but I look at this film now and I go, my gosh, it's so inspirational, because you look at how everybody takes care of each other, even after they've kind of made all these dumb mistakes, and you can still find people there to support you. I find really uplifting. And the movie ends with him falling asleep in that chair with this broken dog at his feet, and Jessica Tandy taking care of him. You can't tell me it's sad. This movie, you walk away from this film feeling great about people, in my opinion. I feel like Nobody's Fool is a bit of a Rorschach test. If you walk away from this film, you go, wow, it was okay. It was kind of depressing. It'd be like, okay, that's how you see the world. Okay. If you walk away from this movie and you go, wow, this is kind of uplifting, because you're seeing these broken people who've made these bad choices, and they're making, they're trying to make better choices, and they're taking care of each other. And even as you get old, you still have that support to look forward to if you make the right choices. I find that to be an amazing message.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think and maybe this is the start of Up, but old people make me sad. Like very old people. So the old lady with dementia, Miss Burrell, the landlady, like her having the illness and her son just like ditching her, it makes me sad. And
It makes you
I
sad
don't
because you know you only have so much time.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
for the person like me who is on, look, I have more years behind me than ahead of me compared to you.
Well, technology these days, you don't know.
I know. I will be cybernetic and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But as every year goes by, I'm more appreciative. I'm not sad about it. I'm looking at it going, wow, like that's the next adventure.
Yeah.
And now you get to kind of see what, you know, the coolest thing. This is the coolest thing about the film is I remember watching it and where I saw it and what my reaction to it was now versus how I look at it today.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing about that age is the perspective that comes with it. And you can go back in these films that you didn't like, or these films that you did like, you're going to have a different opinion about it. And it's going to be like a new watch. Mm-hmm. And I remember you being over at the house and me showing you tons of movies like, oh, you've never seen this? Well, we're going to watch Big Trouble in Little China. Mm-hmm. And you get to relive your experiences through somebody young and their first experience. Like getting old is not terrible.
Yeah. That made me think of, I just rewatched Get Out recently, and it didn't hit as hard for me. And I've realized that ever since the first time I saw it, I have always been showing it to someone who had never seen it before.
Yeah.
And so I was having fun watching them being like, oh my gosh, like they got to get out of there. What's going on? And like watching them piece it together. And then whenever I don't have that, it just kind of, I don't know, it left me feeling a little bit shallow. So that's kind of like the opposite of what happens with this movie. Is like on more watches, I feel more introspective, I guess. Like I feel like I understand it better. And with that movie, I was just like,
well, do you have a movie? Is there a movie that you've watched and your first experience with it is so ingrained that you're afraid to watch it again because it might change your opinion of it?
oh man, I know the answer is yes, but what movie that is? An example is, and I did rewatch it recently, was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
It felt incredible in the moment, but I was hesitant to go back because I didn't think it would stand up as well, and I thought I would be overwhelmed. And like the experience of seeing it in theaters, I think Alexis went with me. We left work early, went on a little date night, and it was like great. And then I was like, well, I'm just going to watch it again at home. And I did have the like a worse experience the next time. I was just like, like maybe I should have just left it feeling a little more magical. But in that specific example, like instead of seeing it from the daughter's perspective, which I did in the first watch, I saw it from the parents' perspective on the second watch. So I did like get something else out of it. Do you have an example in your mind?
There's one film I have not revisited since I've seen it in the theater. Okay. Because I think it's a masterpiece. And I don't have this, this is going to sound weird. I don't have this in my head where I go, well, when I watch it again, I'm not going to appreciate it more. Mm-hmm. But it left such an impression on me that I almost feel like I don't need to watch it again because I could replay every image, every sound, every dialogue in my head. Yeah. And it's No Country for Old Men.
Okay.
That movie, now I've seen thousands of clips of that thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. But seeing it one time in the theater, it blew me away. And it's haunting. It is so haunting in my head. And I think what I worry about is when I sit down again and watch it and now come at it with a bit more, because like you said, some movies you go, well, I know what to expect now, so now I'm going to watch it and I'm going to critique it a little bit. What I'm worried about is revisiting it again, and I will. There's a new 4K out, I think, Criterion. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to have to watch it. I've got this Blu-ray sitting over here unopened. But it's one of those films that the thing that I'm worried about losing is that feeling of it impacted me so much and haunted me, especially the last sequence with Tommy Lee Jones' dream. So
I don't have anything off the top of my head that's similar to that. I feel like I'm a rewatcher. Like, as soon as a movie I love comes out on 4K, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna watch it, and I don't. Sometimes I'll just put it on in the background if it's
yeah,
a movie I like, just because I'm like, oh, there's this scene here. Like, let me watch that. Um, I have definitely had the experience where I feel that way, and then I end up watching it, and it does kind of take something away from it, and I'm like, man,
yeah. I mean,
like that sucks.
I I really hope. I mean, who's to say? At some point, theaters could go away. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I hope it doesn't. And I get excited when I read about movies like The Brutalist, when they're like, "Hey, we're bringing like the big 70 millimeter format back, and we want you to experience the film in a movie theater," and that's great. But I also miss movies like Nobody's Fool, where it's really trying to concentrate on a character study without a lot of flashy plot devices and melodramatic moments. And it's really concerned with its messy characters and trying to get like the best performances out of some of the best working actors of our time.
Yeah. I think a similar movie to this, and now that we're talking about like movie going experiences,
Yeah.
that I had in 2023 was The Holdovers. Every year on my birthday, if it's on a weekday, I take my birthday off and I go see a movie. And I saw The Holdovers, and it was like it was so special, and I loved it. And especially like knowing it was my birthday, I'm like, I should be at work right now, but I'm watching The
Those are the
Holdovers.
best days, though.
And it's a snowy movie. It's has some incredible talent on screen and behind the camera. That's one that I've watched probably 3 or 4 times now, and it doesn't take away from that first experience, but that is an experience I won't forget because it meant a lot to me.
Well, no, and I think it's another movie. Like the more you watch it, the more you're going to get out of it. It's not something. I mean, we talk about Die Hard. I'll watch Die Hard a couple of times per year because I love it. I can't say I'm getting any more out of it, but for me, it feels like a nostalgia trip. And anytime it plays at the AFI and they're like, "Oh, we got a 70 millimeter print," I'm there, right? But movies like Nobody's Fool, I really like because it is almost. It feels like it almost feels like it's revisiting a Steinbeck book like Cannery Row or something of that nature, where you go, I can go back and reread that piece of literature and I'm getting something else out of it with each viewing. And as I get older, or maybe not older, as I experience more in life, I'm finding I can relate to more things that are in the film.
This is how I knew you were a great guest for this podcast, because I want to talk about snobby and pretentious stuff, and you drop a Steinbeck novel. The book I have read the most times in my life is East of Eden.
Oh, great book, man.
Every couple of years I'm like, well, it's about time for me to reread East of Eden again. And
Yeah,
it takes me
Steinbeck's one of my
forever, but
favorites. I love Cannery
Same.
Row. I mean, we were talking on one of the show. I can't remember what it was, but I brought up like one of my favorite short story authors is Raymond Carver. Love Raymond Carver.
I
And
know Raymond Carver.
yeah, Cathedral. Just go read that story. It's a short story. It's fantastic.
Okay.
Or Cathedrals, I think. But well, I'm trying to think. Shortcuts. Have you seen Shortcuts?
No, not yet.
Okay, I think that's the one that's based on a lot of Raymond Carver stories.
Okay.
But Nobody's Fool kind of has that Raymond Carver, John Steinbeck, I don't know, motif to it to a little bit. And again, it's one of those films where it has so much rewatchability if you let it in. And I think if it doesn't have to be that yearly view, but it is definitely something where it's like, hey, it's been 5 years, go watch it again. You got married, go watch it again. Like you had a kid, go watch it again. a life event is going to occur, and this is the type of film. There's a handful of films I think you can go back and do this to, and you're gonna relate a little bit more to that because that movie is tapping into the life experience.
You want to name a couple off the top of your head?
Oh God, now, you're gonna say that again. I'm trying to think about it. Well, Steel Magnolias is one. We talked about that one. I mean, I will rep for that one all day long, and I don't rep for a lot of girl films. I think so. I'll give you a funny example. I think I showed you Say Anything at one point with John Cusack and
No.
Oh, we haven't?
It's
All right.
no, it's on the Criterion channel right now, and I've been hovering over it.
Okay, you should watch it now.
Okay.
So what's funny is when you talk about a film that has a different dynamic at a certain stage of your life. So I saw that in high school, and it was like, oh, that is the best romantic film of all time. And I don't like smoochy films as much as, I'm sitting here repping for Steel Magnolias. Like, well, this guy's, really in touch with it. No.
Yeah.
I like the movies where people get kicked in the face the most.
Yeah.
Right. But if we're talking smoochy films, I'm like, well, I'll watch Say Anything all day long. Up to a point. So there's this sequence. It's the iconic sequence of they broke up and he's standing out there with the boombox and he's trying to get her back. And as somebody who isn't married, is trying to find your true love, you're like, oh, that's so romantic. He's so in love with her. As a dad to a daughter, I watch that scene now and I'm like, dude, get off my lawn and quit stalking my daughter.
Yeah.
Now, I say that in jest because I still find that scene to be very powerful. But her relationship with her father in that film means more to me now because I've had a daughter versus when I was a teenager looking at that and saying, well, this is a pretty good smoochy film. But the cool thing about Say Anything is it does have Don the Dragon Wilson in it because he's kickboxing with John Cusack in the background. So there's some face kicking there.
I haven't seen Say Anything, but it made me think of The Graduate and the big show of love at the end. And then I love how, like, when they're riding on the bus to leave or whatever, and it like holds on it, and it's like, is this the right choice, or did we just go with it in the moment and not really think about it? That's where it took my brain.
Yeah, I would say Nobody's Fool falls in line with all these films that
Really,
when you revisit them, you're going to get something else out of it. And I really think that's a testament to the screenplay, to Benton as a director, everybody's performance in it, specifically Paul Newman. I mean, if this doesn't make you a Paul Newman fan, you don't have a soul, in my opinion.
Of course. Even the lawyer, the one-legged lawyer, like he's not in it much, but whenever he is, it's powerful. Like at the end when he's like, she paid the house off or whatever, and if you give her a hard time, like, that's it for me and you. I'm done in your life.
The cast in the background, they're all flawed. The lawyer's missing a leg, for goodness sakes. What else does that need to tell you?
Yeah.
Everybody has some flaw, and their lives are super messy. But they find these little enjoyments in the poker game. I find that last poker game kind of hilarious, where the sheriff's putting his gun in, and there's a leg, and Sully wins it all. He's got a gun and a leg, and all the money. It's so interesting to watch this film, and you're analyzing it and saying Sully has all of this bad luck. And again, it goes back to this whole aspect I think the movie's talking about, which is your life is composed of the choices you make, right? Can't blame anybody else. It's whatever choice you make. So when Sully's luck changes, because you remember that's kind of a component to it.
Yep.
As soon as his luck changes, you're like, well, why is his luck changing? If you go back and watch it again, it's changing because he's making different choices. Like the luck, it's not luck. What's happening is his life, except maybe the lottery ticket could be luck, right? But things are happening now differently for him because of how he's made different choices in his relationships.
Yeah.
And that is starting to come to fruition in the third act. very subtly.
Yeah, his luck changes as soon as he turns himself into the jail, and
Makes
then
better choices.
yep. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, did any other thing about Nobody's Fool you wanted to say or wanted to discuss?
No, I love talking. Like I said, I had in my head, I'm like, well, how is this conversation going to go with Alex? I mean, we have so much
Me
history.
too.
We're family.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, what's it going to be like to sit there and basically talk about a film like this to somebody I look at as my son and say, hey, what was your reaction to this versus my reaction? Because to me, this I love this film. I've loved it for years. But to hear your appreciation of it, and even your take of it, I'm sitting there going, wow, I feel like I'm hearing myself, 30 years ago to
Yeah.
some degree, or 20 years ago. And it's just refreshing. It just, it makes you, it makes you appreciate the movie more talking with somebody from even a different age bracket or demographic.
Well, what do you do in 20 years from now? We can put something on the calendar to talk about this movie again.
That sounds fantastic. I would love
Yeah.
to talk about this in my 70s and you're in your, 40s?
Yeah. Yep, almost 50.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. I did want to say I thought it was funny that you picked a Nobody's Fool, and I was like, cool, let's do it. And you're like, this is the one with Paul Newman, right? Because there is a Tyler Perry movie called Nobody's Fool from 2018.
Yeah.
And based on the movies that you guys cover on Not a Bomb, that's probably more up your alley
Probably, yes.
of what you're used to. Tiffany Haddish, Whoopi Goldberg, Christmas Rock, 26% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, we'll definitely review that at some point. Only to give us an excuse to talk about this one again, because I would love to hear Brad's opinion on it. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Seeing this film had me go back and watch The Hustler again. When I told Brad we were going to talk about it, he's like, "Well, we should do the Hudsucker Proxy." I'm like, I'm down for it. So give me all the Paul Newman you want.
Nice.
I think later this week I'm going to try and squeeze in The Color of Money, which is the one he won the Academy Award for, and happens to have Tom Cruise, one of my favorites.
Yep. I didn't realize that's a sequel to
Yes.
Hustler, right? I did not realize that until about 2 days ago, because that one had been on my list because of Tom Cruise. Well, obviously because of Paul Newman, but then I was like, oh, Tom Cruise is in it, and Martin Scorsese directed it, right? Like, yeah, why haven't I seen this yet?
It's great. I love it. I mean, does it reach the heights of The Hustler, in my opinion, in terms of dramatic storytelling? No. But it's still it's a powerhouse film. But again, I would probably choose this one over The Color of Money.
Yeah. Actually what started my Paul Newman kick was I think I asked you for a list of like Westerns.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think one of them was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Yeah.
And so I watched that and was like, oh my gosh, like Paul Newman, Robert Redford. So then I watched The Sting.
The Sting is so... Oh, I love The Sting.
Yep. And then...
You could watch the sequel, and it's an interesting take on a sequel gone bad.
Ooh, okay.
But it has Terry Garr, and I kind of like it. But not from a quality standpoint. But the Sting's amazing.
And then same director, I think, was Slapshot.
Oh, yes. Love Slapshot.
Yep. Watched Slapshot. And then Alexis for Christmas a couple years ago, she got me the book or the play of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and the Blu-ray. And so I did like a double feature. I read it and then watched it. The Verdict, I watched.
Oh, love The Verdict.
I read Sidney Lumet's book, Making Movies, and so I was like, well, I got to check that one out too. So I've just been going through it. And
That's another performance of his that I think is just so... I don't want to call it underrated because he got a lot of accolades for that. But, well, Sammy and I had been talking the other day when we were talking about The Hustler, and there are just some movies now... I can't remember who said this, but the oldest film on Netflix was actually pretty recent. So these classics from the 60s or 70s are on streaming services, but not on the most popular streaming service, right?
yeah.
And you talk about things like The Verdict or The Hustler, et cetera. Obviously, there are movie files all over the world who are continuing to discover these. but you just wish some of these things would come into the mainstream to a certain degree.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's with my generation, there's a barrier of black and white. I think a lot of people will refuse to watch black and white films. I actually wanted to ask you if you thought how you thought Nobody's Fool would be as a black and white film.
I think it would still hold up. I actually
Yeah.
So there's been that trend with like taking some modern films and then converting them to the what's Mad Max, the black and chrome
Yep.
edition, stuff
Yep.
like that. And I think Nobody's Fool 100% would stand the test of time of just getting rid of the color.
It's interesting to me. The two that come to mind were Mad Max and Godzilla -1.
Oh yeah.
And those are like kind of big action movies. And it's weird to me that those are the ones going to black and white. Like I saw the black and chrome for Mad Max, but I was like, I don't know. It works, but I prefer the color because the first scene when they shoot the big puffs of smoke into the air, like that is something for me that I will always remember being in the movie theater and seeing when that happens and being like, holy shit, that looks beautiful. And now
Yeah.
every time I see it, like that's my favorite part. And then it goes up and it's not colorful. And like, I'm just like, it's kind of a letdown. But I guess going back to my point, like I know so many of my friends that are like, I won't watch it if it is in black and white. I won't watch it if there's subtitles. I can't
Yeah.
I can't imagine my friends like handing them a Blu-ray. I don't know what they would do with that.
Oh, I have friends too where we'll talk about a film and I'm like, oh, I've got the film. Do you want to watch it? And they're like, well, I don't have a DVD player or Blu-ray player. I'm like, well, then I can't help you.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting when I hear I don't like black and white films. Sometimes I don't know if it's a matter of the color, but if you think about the film noir or you think about films from like 30s and 40s, a lot of times it's not just that the film's in black and white, but the camera is very static. So if you think about filmmaking now and how small cameras are and how much that they can do in drone shots and stuff like that, that wasn't the case in the 30s as an example.
Yeah.
And your camera is huge, right? And so camera placement was very important because you weren't going to move it around. And so when you get people like Alfred Hitchcock and stuff like that who are revolutionizing what you can do with that large camera, it's pretty impressive. But, you know, I love film noir. That's like one of my favorite genres. And when you watch film noir, it is about the story. It is about the characters and the performances. A lot of times it's not about the movement of the camera. But I was just passing something Tabitha was watching on Netflix, and it was the Jamie Foxx new action film or whatnot.
Cameron Diaz is in it, I think.
Yeah, I'm like watching and this isn't just about action choreography, but I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, the quick edits and where's the camera and it's above and it's below and stuff like that. That's what I think people are accustomed to in a modern age storytelling. Whereas it's not just the black and white, but it's the fact that there's not as much editing and movement in those films. And so I think people get bored because it is a bit of a TikTok, YouTube clip generation, and they need some movement in their visuals.
I think it's interesting that the two directors that I think got me into older films in black and white were Hitchcock and Akira Kurosawa, who both moved that camera around like a son of a gun.
Which was unusual compared to, you know, what everybody else was doing in that industry at that time.
I've never considered that, like, you know, maybe it's my age why I'm drawn to those directors, and it is like the moving of the camera why I'm drawn to them. So that's interesting.
Well, again, they're some of the greatest directors of all time for a reason, because they revolutionized cinema. Ingmar Bergman, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you look at the popular, so if you were to look at what was the general movie public going to for the double features in the 30s or 40s, the horror movies, etc., there wasn't a lot of flash. There wasn't a ton of camera movement. The reason why those folks are so revered is because of what they did with the camera as they were telling the story.
Yeah.
But the general populace of the directors and everything else weren't doing that. And so, you know, even Tabitha sometimes I'll be like, hey, you want to watch a film noir? Old black and white, something from late 30s, 40s, you know, and she'll be like, yeah, it's okay. And I'm looking at this going, this is amazing.
Yeah.
because I'm drawn into that hard-boiled story, the femme fatale, all of those tropes of it. But I totally understand why, somebody who is more accustomed to modern television, modern filmmaking, et cetera, might go, well, I just don't want to watch black and white films.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've been snobby about movies
Yeah.
quite a bit. I did have I told you I wanted to talk about other pretentious snobby things, which we don't have to if you didn't come prepared with something, but I had something that I know you're also I don't know if pretentious is about, but whenever I was watching this movie, I was like, okay, where's this at? Bath, New York. And what I do is I go to Apple Maps.
Okay.
Apple Maps, the rating system on there is linked to Yelp and OpenTable. So I pull up and I go to Bath and I go to the main street and I'm looking at all the little restaurants there are.
Is there a
Because
Bath? I thought it was a fictional town.
there is a Bath, New York near the Finger Lakes.
Okay.
I don't think it's the same one, but there is a Bath, New York. I think in the movie it's North Bath or something like that.
Yeah.
And there isn't a North Bath. There's just a Bath, and it's too small for there to be a North. But yeah, my snobbiness is I like good restaurants.
Oh,
And
do
I
too.
found by looking at, I guess, the Yelp reviews, if it's a 4.5 or higher, I'm like, yes, I want to eat there. I want to try it. It's not always going to be great, but that's kind of my threshold for like, does this have a higher critic score than an audience score? Is the Yelp 4.5 and higher? And then I take a look. So the only one I really found in Bath was they had a cool thing called Tubtown Brewing, and it's bathroom themed.
Oh, okay.
Had really good reviews. They're known for their IPAs. So
When you come out here, we'll take a train up there or something.
I love it. Do you have a way of finding restaurants is my answer, because I love coming out to visit you mostly for hanging out, but
It is the food.
is always incredible.
Yeah.
Do you have a way of finding good food similar to my criteria?
Oh, absolutely. So mine is easier.
Okay.
When we moved out to Baltimore, a gentleman I had worked with, Justin, I think you might have met him once.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I know every time you come out here, we're always introducing you to somebody else. But
Yes.
Justin and I have known each other for like a decade now, and we work together. We still do. But what was amazing is Justin is a huge foodie, to the point that he and his wife would go, oh, we're going to go to Pittsburgh, and we heard about these restaurants. We're going to try that out and explore the city, right?
Okay.
So what happens, and what's amazing is my family just trusts Justin wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be in a part of Baltimore. We could be in Fells Point or something of that nature. And then we know all of our restaurants that we love because Justin has introduced those to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I've introduced you to, duck fat fries, tachos,
Yep.
Korean barbecue taco, anything out here, chaps, pit beef, all that stuff, is a result of Justin saying, well, you're going to try this, this, or this.
Mm-hmm.
So about once a month, Justin and I after work will just be like, well, what are we going to go try this time? So as an example, one of the premier East Coast places that seats maybe 20 people, Little Donna's in Baltimore. And I think it made like national news for having like some of the best pies or whatever on the East Coast. And it takes forever to get a reservation to get in there. So we finally got a reservation and went, and it's fantastic. But this is what Justin and I do is Justin does this research, and in a funny story, there's a Baltimore magazine, and so Baltimore has Restaurant Week, and Restaurant Week is everybody like goes all out everywhere and says, well, this is our special and we only do it for this week and it's real fancy. I always take you to Bushmills as an example, and we do the duck fat fries, etc. They do a Restaurant Week and their menu is stupid, but that's a ridiculously good place to begin with. But Justin comes in. Baltimore had their magazine had published like, oh, here's the top 50 crab cakes in the Maryland area. So Justin walks in and we're at work and he slams that magazine down. He goes, well, let's just find out. And so as he's going through it, he's like, 20? No way, man. That's like, that shouldn't even be on the list. And he disagrees with everything on there. And I got to tell you, everything he's ever said, like, oh, go here and you're going to get this ramen, or go here and this is the best crab cake, or go here and this is your best tomato pie. Never wrong, ever. Like, you go to Philadelphia and you got Jim, or not Jim's, the two famous cheesesteak shops. I don't even go there because we go to Jim's South Street. Because once you find that place, you forget about all the touristy stuff. They only take cash, and you go up, and he's like, "You're gonna order this, and then we might, go to Ishkabibbles across the street for the French fries, because that's where the best fries are." But that's what it's like, kind of touring the city with Justin.
How do I get a Justin in Cleveland?
I'm sure. Look, here's the thing about Justin. I could probably message him right now and go, "Hey, look, I need like the top 5 restaurants in Cleveland," and he'll rattle them off.
Well,
every time I go to
perfect.
Yeah, every time he pointed me to some Korean barbecue place that was in an alley in New York, and it was here's another Justin story. We go to New Orleans because I was speaking out there, and he came with me, and our flight got delayed back to Baltimore, so we get an extra night. And we're standing in the lobby because Justin's like, "We're gonna go eat at this place," and I'm like, "Perfect." So some other people got stranded too, and they come down. They're like, "Oh, we're just going to the old part of New Orleans, the touristy place. We're going to eat here and here." And Justin's like, "Go ahead. I don't care. We're going over here." So everybody's like, "Oh, we're going to go with you." So we get in this Uber to go to this part of New Orleans that looks run down. And then we come up to what looks like a strip mall, and it looks abandoned, but there's just one building on the corner. And I'm like, "What are you taking us to?" He's like, "Don't worry about it." You go in, it's all mahogany and everything else. Top 3 dinner I've ever had in my entire life. And it's the first place I actually did like a Japanese whiskey flight too, because he knew they had a big whiskey, selection. But if you were to look at it from the outside in New Orleans, you're like, "Well, you're getting murdered here." Come to find out, whoever, and I'd have to ask Justin what the restaurant is, but apparently the guy who owns it or operates it won some Food Network competition, and that's his restaurant. But Justin knows these things.
Yeah.
So I don't trust Yelp at all. Like, we'll literally be in some part of a city, and my family would be like, "Well, what does Justin recommend?" And then you got to text Justin, and he'll tell you, and everything's perfect.
That's how I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be Justin. Like, I don't know how to know the good places. Like, I need his superpower or his secret. But I've noticed, like, Google reviews, they suck. Like, everything
Absolutely.
is 4 stars. Then the Taco Bell near you is 4 stars. And
Well,
Taco
social
Bell,
media
like,
can be manipulated.
yeah. That's why I trust Yelp a little more. Like, it still can be, but I've noticed, like, the 4.5 is hard to get. There's so many 4s, there's so many 3.5s, but a 4.5, like, I'll give it a shot. There's a lot of people that, like, if someone just is like, "Oh, you gotta check this place," and I take a look and it's a 3 or 3.5, I'm like, "Yeah, I'll let you know," and I'm not writing it down.
Yeah, I don't know what his I mean, it is a secret power in my opinion for what he does, but yeah, we'll go somewhere. We were in Philly one evening, and he's like, "The best nachos are in this neighborhood bar down here." Sure enough, he wasn't kidding. And then he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go get a hamburger over here, Fuzzy Smash Burger," which is a big thing in Baltimore. He introduced me to that thing, and it's ridiculous. But I think from his perspective, I mean, he tries it all out. So he doesn't necessarily just, I think his mantra is, "Yeah, you can show me whatever the review is, but I'm going to go try it for myself." And he's really good. Like, anytime we'll go hang out somewhere, he's great about, he's super sociable. So he'll pick up a conversation and he'll start asking questions. What's the best place here, here, and here? And, but he's got his whole Rolodex in his head of every great spot in pretty much any city. I guarantee, pick a city, Justin, what are the best restaurants here? He went to that city to just try the restaurants out.
That's what I'm trying to do. Like, when we talk about traveling, like, the first thing I'm doing is looking up, okay, what are the best restaurants in the city? And that's your fault, because the first time I ever not the first time I ever flew, actually, the second time I ever flew was to go visit you in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And you took me to all these places, and I'm like, not only did I get to see the city, like, of Baltimore and all the different neighborhoods, but I got to eat some good food while I was doing it. So that's my number one. Like, when we went to New York, we just picked out like 1 or 2 restaurants in each of the neighborhoods that we were going to, and we just spent a whole day going and eating a bunch of different food, and we fell asleep at like 6 p.m. because our bellies were full, but like that's the traveling I like to do.
Yeah, Baltimore has a sneaky food scene that I think is super underappreciated, even from the East Coasters. But yeah, I mean, one of our favorite places to go is our house or the Market Street place by the museum. It's blanking. But anyways, what's kind of cool is Baltimore has these little places where people will do startup little kiosk restaurants, and if they take off, then they become like a full restaurant in a building.
Yeah.
But you get to kind of try all these experiments in like an our house or Mount Vernon Market. That's what I was thinking of. And that, I mean, that's the best thing about this city is you're not going to have a shortage of just different things. And we have such a diverse population out here between Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Polish, you name it. Every ethnicity is out here, and there is some type of restaurant representation from that, and they're all just freaking fantastic. And you get these little places like Bushmills, which is 5 minutes from us, where I remember taking you for the first time, and you made the same comment, like, are we going to like a biker bar? We're like, no, this is like one of the best restaurants ever. You cannot judge a place out here based on its exterior.
Yep. Yeah, just last Monday, I went with a friend to just out for lunch on MLK Day because we had the day off, and we pulled up and it looked just like that, like a biker bar. We actually walked in and the inauguration was on, and people were dressed up for it and cheering, and we were like, we're just trying to eat a chicken wrap. Let me tell you, that was the best chicken wrap I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
The fries were so good, and we were like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I want to come back for the food, but
When we went to Little Donna's,
nice.
the way he hyped it up, I'm expecting like this big, nice restaurant in Baltimore. And the way the Uber driver took us, we're going through an alley, and then we show up, and I'm like, well, this looks like two houses that were just converted to, and that's exactly what it is. But man, I got to tell you that was fantastic, just amazing dining experience, and that was just a few weeks ago.
I would say you have to take me sometime, but it sounds very hard to get into. So.
Let me know when you're going to be here, and we'll make a reservation for it, because that's what we had. We had to make reservations for a Tuesday night, like 4 weeks in advance.
Jeez, crazy.